Hello, you're watching TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick and I'm talking with Charlie Ashton of Wind River. Charlie, good to see you again. It's been a year, it must be an anniversary.
It's been a while, hasn't it? It's good, very good to see you again, Martin.
Let's look at the notion that a lot of people are talking about, that of making NFV a reality. To be able to do that, do you think it's true that CSPs will be able to be absolutely assured that their new services carried on an NFV network are actually so-called carrier grade? Because if it isn't, they're not going to use them.
Oh, it's an absolute imperative for them. I think what we've seen is a real shift in their emphasis probably over the past couple of years or so. 2 years ago they were doing technology evals and they were doing proof of concepts, and at that point, carrier grade reliability wasn't necessarily so important to them. They just wanted to prove that something would work. But we've seen an absolute shift in their thinking now. They recognize that by the time they're going to deploy virtualized services in their production networks, then they need to meet the standards of uptime that their customers have expected, traditionally. Otherwise, there's a massive financial burden for them, a financial impact in three areas. First of all, they lose top-line revenue because they have to pay out on penalties against the service level agreements. Secondly, they have the operational costs to go fix the problems. And thirdly, if the problems recur sufficiently often, they're going to have customer churn and all the costs associated with that. So no, we see it as something that the carriers are taking extremely seriously.
Okay, Charlie, now if vendors provide what the CSPs want in terms of carrier grade availability, nonetheless carriers are going to have to concentrate very, very heavily, relentlessly on the business case for NFV. Do you think carriers, CSPs know actually what that is yet? Or are they just floundering about a bit in the dark?
No, I think they're paying equal attention to some of the business issues as they are to the technical feasibility. We have a lot of discussions with carriers who are very interested in modeling the overall, return on investment and the total cost of ownership, for their NFV, their planned NFV deployments. And we actually developed a fairly sophisticated modeling tool that we use with them. It enables them to input their assumptions about their customer base, their data centers, how they model the cost of downtime, a lot of parameters there, and then play with those different parameters to really look at the trade-offs between different implementation scenarios for their virtualization platforms.
Moving on, Charlie, CSPs are asking more and more often, I've spoken to them, quite a lot of them about it. It sounds great, NFV, so does SDN, so does the cloud, cloudification, everything else. But where on earth do I start? I have a network which has been in the ground or in the ether for quite a long time. How do I begin? They're looking at the competition, they're seeing how things are moving, how people are doing one competitor doing one thing, somebody else is doing something else. Where do they start?
What we're hearing more and more from the service providers is that the early use case is going to be around virtual CPE, and specifically virtual business CPE or virtual enterprise CPE. I think there's at least a couple of major reasons for that. The first one is that the business benefits are very compelling. And the second one is that if you're doing virtualized CPE, you don't really need to have all of the complex management and orchestration sorted out in the core networks. And obviously there's still a certain amount of uncertainty in the industry as to what management and orchestration is going to look like long term. So I think primarily for those two reasons, a lot of the service providers are settling on virtual CPE as the early use case that they're targeting. However,
you will be aware as well as I am that some vendors, mainly the vendors, are saying, look, when NFV started 3.5 years or so ago and became aware of it, we were told that we would have full-scale or large-scale, at least, commercial deployments in networks within 18 months. That 18 months has continued to be the same 18 months, but now over 3.5 years. I understand the validity of the virtual CPE case and the rest of it, but how long do you think it's going to be before we get real-life revenue-earning services and applications on NFV in a full-scale network environment?
I think we have to draw a little bit of a distinction between NFV and network virtualization. There's a lot of use cases that maybe don't follow the overall ETSI model and the ETSI architecture with all the different elements that was defined by that standards organization. But nevertheless, these use cases are delivering significant business value for the service providers because of the advantages that you get of virtualization. And I do think that CPE is an example of that. Maybe it's not a classic NFV use case per the original ETSI thought process, but it's a very real business application where you can get very real business ROI improvements through deploying virtualized services as opposed to traditional hardware appliances. So I think as an industry, maybe we need to look at the broader scope of network virtualization rather than perhaps what has been thought of as a more narrow definition of NFV kind of coming out of the ETSI work.
The latest research, Charlie, into NFV shows that one of the keys to making it a reality is to ensure that security vulnerabilities are addressed immediately and not left to be tackled later when the thing's embedded in working. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I think it's absolutely critical. Yeah, and I think that there's so many different aspects to security that have to be addressed in an overall deployment that you have to be very careful that you're considering every link in the chain there. So fundamentally in the infrastructure platform you have to have a very high degree of security, and there's telecom standards around that. For example, the AAA standard, which has been around for several years, which is authentication, authorization, and accounting. That's a well understood set of guidelines that actually are mandated for telecom networks. Then you've got to look at the security for the VNFs and the virtual machines themselves. You've got to have isolation between the VMs, and very importantly for OpenStack deployments, which are going to be most of the deployments, you have to think about the secure connection between the compute node and the control node. There's a lot of different aspects to security, and you have to solve every one of them, otherwise there's going to be a weak link that can be exploited.
Do you think that at the moment networks will be secure? We know that it's taking slightly longer than some vendors and manufacturers anticipated it would to get NFV networks in place. But is the security problem in itself delaying it, or is it something else?
I don't think the security problem as such is delaying it. I think the service providers are very, very careful in their conversations with vendors to make sure that all of the security aspects of a solution are properly addressed. I know it's something that we spend a lot of time on when we're talking to service providers. Even though our contribution to the system is the NFV infrastructure software platform, we nevertheless have a lot to do with the security around the VMs and the security of the connection between the OpenStack nodes. So that comes up a lot in our detailed conversations with the service providers, and they're absolutely taking it very seriously.
Well, if we meet again in 12 months' time, we shall take another look at it. And until then, thanks very much indeed.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.